In the space of about 5 days, a section of front that had barely moved in months, despite constant fighting, simply came apart. Not slowly pushed back, not ground down over weeks. It collapsed. And here is the strange part. The side that did this was smaller, with fewer troops and less firepower than the army it broke. It did not win by being stronger. It won in large part by telling everyone exactly where it was going to attack, and then attacking somewhere else entirely. In roughly a week, the smaller force retook some 12,000 square kilometers, more ground than its enemy had captured in the previous 5 months combined. It was one of the fastest advances of the entire war. And it turned on a single, deliberate lie about where the real blow would land. So here is what this briefing covers, in order. First, the stalemate. Why a smaller army could not simply push the bigger one back. Second, the misdirection that drew the enemy's best troops the wrong way. Third, the break, when a thin sector shattered. And fourth, what it teaches about how a weaker force beats a stronger one. To understand the trick, start with the problem it was built to solve. By the late summer of 2022, the war had settled into a long, grinding front stretching for hundreds of kilometers from the northeast down to the southern coast. Both sides were dug into trenches and tree lines, exhausted after months of fighting and heavily reliant on artillery duels that chewed up ground and men for tiny gains. Attacking straight into prepared defenses like these, across open fields swept by guns, is one of the oldest and most expensive things an army can attempt. It is how the First World War killed a generation. And the smaller army simply could not afford to fight that kind of battle. It had fewer troops, less ammunition, and no margin at all to trade lives for meters the way its opponent could. A head-on offensive, launched anywhere the enemy was ready and waiting, would stall within hours in a field of mud and shell craters and bleed out the very units it could least afford to lose. To win, it would have to do the opposite of what a frontal assault demands. It would have to find the one place the enemy was weak and refuse to fight him anywhere he was strong. But the bigger army had a weakness hidden inside its size. To hold such an enormous front, it had to stretch itself thin. Its best formations, its elite paratroopers, and its most capable armored units were concentrated where it expected the real fighting to happen. The long, quiet stretches in between were handed to whoever was left. Hastily mobilized men, National Guard troops meant for policing, and understrength units, lightly dug in and largely ignored. On a briefing map, the line looked continuous and solid. In places, it was a paper shell, and both sides knew it. So the plan wrote itself, at least in theory. Find a stretch of front the enemy is not watching, held by troops who cannot stop you, and hit it with everything you have as fast as you can move. The hard part was never the where. The hard part was making absolutely certain the enemy kept looking somewhere else, right up until the moment it was too late, while you quietly gathered your best units to strike. This is the core of it. You do not beat a bigger army everywhere. You beat it in one place of your choosing, at a moment of your choosing, while it is looking the other way. Everything that followed was built to engineer exactly that situation. Which brings us to one of the most successful acts of military deception in years. For weeks, Ukraine did something armies almost never do on purpose. It advertised its next offensive in detail, in public. senior officials went on the record about a coming push in the south toward the occupied regional capital of Kherson. Commanders talked about liberating the city. Forces and equipment moved into the southern sector in plain sight, easy to count from the air and from orbit. To a watching enemy poring over satellite imagery and intercepts, the message could not have been louder or more consistent. The decisive battle of the war is coming, and it is coming here in the south very soon. The effect was exactly what Ukraine wanted. Long-range rockets began cutting the bridges behind the Russian lines in the south, isolating the defenders there and making Kherson look even more like the war's decisive fight. And Russia responded the way any commander would. It moved reserves, including some of its most capable remaining units, down to the south to meet the threat, which quietly drained the northeast. The tool that sold the story was precision. A handful of Western-supplied long-range rocket launchers could reach dozens of kilometers behind the front and put a guided rocket through a bridge or a supply dump with a single salvo. In the south, Ukraine used them methodically, hammering the crossings over the wide Dnipro River until the Russian force defending Kherson was nearly cut off, its supplies reduced to a trickle over pontoons and barges. That made the southern intention completely believable. Nobody, the reasoning went, spends weeks and precious rockets sealing off a place they do not intend to storm. The isolation was real. What it pointed at was not. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. The loudest, most watched, most reported offensive of the entire war was, in part, a spotlight. And it was pointed, very deliberately and very patiently, in exactly the wrong direction. The enemy was not tricked once. He was persuaded, over weeks, to move his own strength to the wrong end of the country. Then, on a quiet stretch of front in the northeast, the real blow landed. The Kharkiv sector had become a backwater. The front here was held by thinly spread second-rate units, with the good troops long since sent elsewhere, many of them now in the south. There were few reserves, few prepared fallback positions, and little expectation of a serious attack. It was, in short, the perfect place. In early September it came, and almost nobody outside the plan saw it coming. Ukrainian mechanized brigades, many riding modern Western-supplied fighting vehicles, punched straight through the thin line near a town called Balaklia, and then made the choice that defined the whole battle. Instead of turning aside to fight and clear each strong point they passed, the way a cautious attacker would, the spearheads left them sitting there and raced on into the open country and the road network behind. Bypassed positions could be dealt with later. Speed could not be recovered once lost. The speed is the whole story. In a matter of days, the spearheads covered ground that grinding offensives elsewhere had failed to take in months, in some places advancing dozens of kilometers in a single day. Every kilometer of that speed stole time from the defenders, the one thing they could not manufacture. Time to work out what was actually happening. Time to report it up a chain of command, and time to rush help that was sitting hundreds of kilometers away in the south, watching the wrong horizon. And they were aiming at something very specific. The town of Izium sat astride the rail lines and highways that supplied the entire Russian effort across the northern part of the front. Ammunition, fuel, and reinforcements for a huge stretch of the line all flowed through it. It was the beating heart of the sector's logistics, and it was now suddenly unexpectedly, within reach of a fast-moving armored column. When the spearheads closed on it, and the garrison fled rather than be encircled, Ukraine did not just capture a town on a map. It pulled the plug on everything downstream, and the units still holding the front to the east found the supply lines behind them going dead. This is what makes it different from almost every other offensive in the war. The line did not bend, and it was not slowly ground down over weeks of costly assaults. It broke all at once from the inside, the moment its supporting structure was pulled out from under it. A breakthrough is not the same as a collapse. So why did this one cascade? Stack the reasons, and it becomes obvious. The troops on the line were few and second-rate. Their reserves were hundreds of kilometers away in the south, chasing the wrong offensive. The logistics hub at Izium was gone, cutting the flow of fuel and ammunition. Communication between units broke down, and all of it unfolded faster than any order to hold could be written and delivered. Remove any single one, and the front bends. Together, it shattered. On the ground, that math turned into scenes of a genuine rout. Whole units pulled back so fast and with so little warning that they left almost everything behind. Crates of ammunition, fuel, food, documents, and hundreds of vehicles, including modern tanks and artillery pieces, were captured intact, some still fueled and running, and simply turned around against their former owners. For a stretch of that autumn, analysts joked that the retreating army had become one of the single largest suppliers of heavy equipment to the force chasing it, an accusation that was not really a joke at all. The numbers tell the scale. In about a week, the offensive reclaimed roughly 12,000 square kilometers and shattered an entire sector of the front. It was not a marginal gain measured in tree lines and villages. It was a strategic earthquake, and it cost the attacker a fraction of what a frontal grind would have. So a bigger, stronger, better supplied army lost an entire sector of front in the space of a week, not because it was beaten everywhere along the line, because it was beaten decisively in the one narrow place it had stopped looking, and everything else unraveled from there. Step back. And this is a lesson as old as war, proven again with modern tools. The first half of that lesson is deception. Not a clever trick played once, but a sustained effort to shape what the enemy believes and where he puts his strength. The goal is not to hide your attack. It is to make the enemy make himself strong in the wrong place, with his own hands, so that the place you actually hit is one he has personally emptied. The second half is tempo. Speed is not just about covering ground on a map. It is about acting faster than the other side can even understand what is happening, let alone respond to it. Military theorists call it getting inside the enemy's decision loop. A breakthrough only gives you a hole in the line. Tempo is what turns that hole into a collapse by reaching the next objective and the one after that, before anyone on the other side has finished arguing about how to defend the first. Move faster than the enemy can think and decide, and his greater numbers simply never arrive where they are needed. None of this made the smaller army any bigger. What it did was refuse to fight the bigger army on the bigger army's terms, and instead choose the one piece of ground and the one moment where it could arrive as the stronger side. Concentration of force in the right place at the right time beats raw numbers spread thin. That is the real takeaway, and it long outlasts this one battle. You do not have to be stronger everywhere. You have to be stronger in the place that matters, at the moment that matters, while your enemy is convinced the decision lies somewhere else. Get that right, and a smaller force can break a larger one in a week. We have looked at how a weaker force wins by choosing its ground and hiding its intent. Next time, what happens when the ground itself becomes the weapon, when rivers, cities, and terrain are engineered to swallow an advancing army whole? Keep watching the map and watch the ground itself. The decisive move in war is usually the one the enemy never even sees being set.